Hey y'all, what's going on? What y'all doing? What y'all doing this weekend? Everybody tell me what you're doing this weekend. We're going to a blues festival this afternoon. Gonna have a good time. I'm gonna ride my ATV down there with my good looking wife. We're gonna sit in lawn chairs on the lawn and listen to some good blues music. Y'all tell me what you're doing this weekend. In this video, we've got 3 really good stories. And then at the end, I want to tell you about another project I'm doing. So when I get to the 3rd story and I'm done with it, if you don't want to hear some yakking, you can take a hike. If you do want to hear some yakking, hang on. I'm going to tell you about a new project I've got. Let's jump into this video. All right, here we go. Here's a great little story from Roy. Roy is a good writer, and I really appreciate him sending this. Here's what he writes. The first thing he says is, most people think I'm a little off, so feel free to use my name. But I don't normally give people's full names. I just say the first name if they give me permission to. I don't know. It puts a little personality to it or something like that. But here's what Roy writes. Back in the 1980s and early 90s, I lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Like many of the people who live up there, I was a hunter. When I was 17, I built a deer blind on the top of a ridge about a half a mile from my home. I also had a bait pile consisting of apples and corn that the local wildlife always picked at. I was up there a lot, never once felt uncomfortable or afraid. I never felt like anything was watching me or like I should leave. Unless the season was open, I was generally up there armed only with my hunting knife, but I never felt a reason to carry anything bigger or more powerful. On the 6th day of the 14-day season, I quickly finished my after-school chores and headed to my blind. I'd been seeing a nice buck, but it was always after legal shooting hours. I had hopes that one day he would come in early and I'd get a shot at him. That was my main thought as I settled onto my stool inside the blind. After 20 minutes, my thoughts were drawn away from that buck when it occurred to me the woods were incredibly quiet. None of the little critters who normally feasted on the bait pile were around. There were no birds flying around trying to get their share, not even the wind was blowing. That was when a feeling of utter terror came over me. When the woods are abnormally quiet, it usually means there's a predator close by. My head was turning on a swivel, and I began looking all around me for whatever had caused everything to go quiet, and for whatever had put that awful fear in my gut. My dad and our neighbor didn't get along. They had even come to blows at a local grocery store, which got them both banned for 6 months. Despite this, the neighbor had recently come to our house, risking life and limb to let my dad know he'd seen a lynx in the vicinity. Considering their intense dislike for each other, it must have taken quite a bit of courage for that man to come up and warn my dad of possible danger to our livestock. A few days later, one of our horses came in with 3 deep parallel slashes on her right shoulder. The vet who came out to stitch her up said they looked like they'd been done by a large cat. They were each at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep. There was a 4th wound, but it was just a bloody scratch. Knowing this, when the fear hit me, I was looking for a lynx. I couldn't hear or see anything, but I couldn't shake that feeling. I was scared out of my mind, but I didn't understand why, and all the time I'd spent up there with nothing but my hunting knife, I had never felt afraid. One day I even found bear tracks around my bait pile and bear scat near my blind, and I never felt as terrified as I did that moment. Suddenly it was like someone was telling me to leave, as if someone had put that thought in my head. I don't believe I thought it because I was too busy looking around and being unbelievably scared. A few minutes passed and my fear was only getting worse when I heard a noise off to my left. Leaves rustled to the south of my blind, followed by a tremendous crack that was as loud as a rifle shot. I nearly unloaded my bowels into my camouflage pants. Whew, good thing you didn't, Roy. Before I had time to react, a perfectly healthy 8-inch in diameter tree fell and landed right next to my blind. Some of the branches took out the side of it and left scratches on my face and neck. And all this happened with no wind. The tree was broken off at about 8 to 9 feet above the ground. It had been snapped in two. If whatever made that tree fall wanted to hurt me really bad, it could have dropped the tree on me instead of next to my blind. And if it wanted to kill me, there was nothing I could do about it. I know for a fact that no black bear could have broken that tree like that. My guess is that my stool is still up there on that ridge, and I've never been back. Many years later, I was out with a couple of buddies tipping a few at the local watering hole one night. After closing time, we were on our way home in my 1974 Chevy Love pickup when I spilled my beer, which led to my truck being in a ditch in the middle of nowhere. We stood on the road for several minutes deciding whether to walk to a nearby house or call for help, or walk 2 miles to my friend's house and get his truck to pull it out. All the conversation came to a halt when we heard something that sounded like chattering teeth in the woods behind us. We thought maybe we woke up an angry squirrel who was telling us off. A big, really big angry squirrel. I don't know, that settled it. We decided to walk back to my friend's house. As soon as we started walking, we realized something was keeping pace with us just beyond the tree line in the woods on the north side of the road. When we walked, it walked with us. When we stopped to listen, it would maybe take another step and then stop too. We all three got sober really quick. As it continued to keep pace with us, walking when we walked and stopping when we stopped, we came to the conclusion that it must be a big man walking in the woods. We even tried talking to him, but we never got a reply. As hunters, we knew it wasn't a deer or any other four-legged animal. It was definitely bipedal, so we ran. It ran right along with us. When we stopped, it stopped within 1 or 2 steps after us. Then we walked back towards my truck, and it turned around and kept pace. 2 of us had been in the military, so I quietly said, "We're going to do an about-face." We put the non-military friend in the middle and told him to follow our moves. The moon was just bright enough that we could see each other. "About face," I whispered. We performed the move perfectly. After 3 steps, we stopped. Over in the woods, we clearly heard it turn around and then stop and wait for our next move. This thing paralleled us inside the tree line until we finally came to a house with a yard mowed up to the woods. I guess it didn't want to show itself because once we rounded the corner, we never heard it again. When we got back to my truck, there were rocks laying all over the flatbed that weren't there when we left. We yanked my truck out of that ditch in record time and got the hell out of there. There was one other time. It happened before the night I put my truck in the ditch, but well after I'd had the incident with the deer blind. I saved it for last because it's the experience that made me a knower. After that, I lost every doubt that these Sasquatch really do exist. I had gone up to the UP to get some poles to make a fort for my young sons. We didn't have any trees big enough, so I cut some 16-foot cedar poles and strapped them to the top of my 1988 Dodge Caravan to bring home. I got up to my buddy's place on Friday night. Since he was in college and living in the dorm, he wasn't going to arrive until Saturday morning. It was about 10 p.m. when I got there, so I rolled out my sleeping bag in the back of the van and watched the stars through the sunroof until I fell asleep. I don't know what woke me, but around 1:30, I was suddenly wide awake. I could see out of most of the windows, the moon was bright, but I couldn't see the stars through the sunroof. My friend lived primitively. He had no electricity on the place. The nearest street light, along with the nearest neighbor, was a good 3 miles away. Light pollution was not an issue. That's when I noticed the face. It was looking down at me through the sunroof. It looked like a giant human, but a lot hairier. It had dark hair all around its face. My .357 Magnum was under my pillow. I wanted to feel it in my hand, but it felt like something was holding me down. I couldn't move. I thought immediately of an accident I'd had while I was in the Navy that left me temporarily paralyzed. My brain was telling my arms to get the gun, but my body would not obey. Finally, the face pulled back and disappeared from my view. I watched as a large hairy torso passed the side windows of the van. It walked across the driveway behind me and disappeared into the woods. As soon as it was gone, I could move again. I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my gun, opened the side door, and shined my spotlight all around, but I never saw anything. I figured it was safe to crawl out of the van and relieve myself, but I listened closely as I did so. I couldn't hear anything. The woods were completely silent. I don't even think the mosquitoes were buzzing. My hair was standing on end, but there wasn't much else I could do, so I crawled back into my sleeping bag and I started thinking about what had just happened. For a long time, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but the next morning, I could see where something had leaned up against my van and left an imprint in the dust. There were other places where the dust had been brushed off all down the side. It had also left a trail through the dew and the grass and the weeds leading to the woods. I can still see that face in my mind's eye like it was yesterday. I now know there is something out there. It's big, it's hairy, and it'll scare the crap out of you if you ever get to see one. And that's the end of his email. And I'm not laughing at him. This guy's a good writer, and he's able to convey his feelings in a real, direct way. And this is amazing. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I think that I've never been to Michigan. Well, I've been to Detroit one time. But I've never been up in the wilderness area of northern Michigan. I'm assuming the Upper Peninsula is north in Michigan. I'm just not familiar with the state. From what I've read and heard from some of these stories is that is a wilderness area, and it's a great sporting area, fishing and hunting. And so I think it would be great habitat for some of these things to live. I mean, I don't really know, but according to Roy's story, it sounds like it is. But Roy, also, I got your personal note to me, and I love you, brother. I wish I could read it to the audience, because this is a man who has looked back on his life, and unlike some people, he's admitted some of the things that he's done wrong, which very few people do in this culture. You'll mainly see older guys 50 and up doing that. You hardly ever see anybody younger than that admitting they've done anything wrong. And I'm not saying he's wrong. I wish I could share it with you. But Roy is a guy who understands his, for lack of a better term, depravity. I understand to some extent my depravity. I'm a totally worthless person in the eyes of God. If you use God as a standard, I'm pretty depraved. And Roy has realized that just like I have. And so it makes you humble. It makes you humble with your life and the opinions you have and when to speak up and when to not speak up. And I just wanted to tell Roy, thank you for the note. I think you and I are kindred spirits. There's a lot of things in my life I've done wrong. I mean, I've really screwed it up. You know, we look back at those things and we can't change them, but just to realize it and own it and embrace it and apologize to the people you've hurt in the past, that's the best we can do. But to do that, it means to me that you've stepped up and you're finally a man. Even though we're in our 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s, it doesn't matter when you do it. It's just you have to look back and you have to be self-critical and self-evaluate the things you've done. I know I'm rambling on, but his note to me really, really nailed me. And I just wanted to tell him I appreciate it. Love you, Roy. Thanks for the note. And thanks for the story. It was awesome. All right, let's go to another one. Here's another email from someone who wants to be anonymous, and here's what they write. I grew up in the mountains of central Washington around the 4,000-foot level. Our neighbors were 20 miles away and in a different zip code and a different area code. The view from our front deck was nothing but tree-covered mountains and huge rock walls. We were as remote as you can get. My father was the caretaker of an old mine that had been shut down in the 1960s. We lived there rent-free as long as the family took care of the property and the buildings on the property. My father had worked at that mine since before he met my mother, so he was extremely knowledgeable of the surrounding areas. When I got old enough to join him on some of his excursions into the woods, he was quick to teach me that for a number of reasons we didn't go out alone at night, and we always carried a rifle. We hunted every year and fished almost every day and shoveled a ton of snow during the winter. We normally got 7 or 8 feet of snow each year. Our road was closed in the winter, and that meant we had to snowmobile 20 miles to the nearest plowed road when we needed to go anywhere. I wasn't kidding when I said we were remote. When I was 6 years old, I heard a howl that still rings in my head today. I didn't know what it was until recently when I heard something close to it on a TV show. Back then, Pops would say it was only a bear and not to worry about it. I had no reason not to believe my dad. He also told me it was a bear that often watched me through the window at night, but it never bothered anyone. I was proud as ever when my parents would let me stay up until 10 p.m. I felt like a man, even though I was only 12 years old. Ooh, staying up at night. Woo, I remember that. One night while I was watching TV, satellite at the time, I looked into the kitchen and saw a large black arm reach through the window and grab an apple and an orange my mom had left on the counter. I was too scared to even move, much less say anything. The next morning, when I told my dad, he just said, "Yeah, bears will do that from time to time." When I was 16, we finally got a power source at the camp, and it changed our world. We were able to continue working until much later at night. Those lights allowed us to see well into the night, and on occasion, we would see something tall, black, and bipedal walking through the camp or between the buildings. It scared my mom so much that we moved a few months later. Dad stayed up there and completed his mission. Obviously, I grew up knowing about Sasquatch and the power they possess. For instance, a grizzly bear ran through our camp one evening. It didn't seem to care if we were there or not. It just kept looking behind it as if something was chasing it. We heard Sasquatch fight each other for other territory too. We've even seen them do some miraculous physical things that even machinery couldn't do. When I was in the military, I shared these stories, and from there I was ushered into another department of the government. That department led me to another one that actually studies the Sasquatch species exclusively. I'm here to tell you that the DNR, Forest Service, and BLM all know about these things. They just don't confirm it publicly, but these departments have hair, scat, body parts, and supposedly whole bodies from various places where they've been studied. I've never seen any of the bodies, but I would have loved to. In 2014, after 22 years, I retired from government service. I've since lost contact with all the individuals from the group, so I have no idea what the scuttlebutt is around the coffee pot these days. I do know that certain wildlife area documents, especially the newer ones, include wording about keeping areas untouched for these bipedal beings. It started showing up in the mid-1990s. The problem is you have to dig pretty deep and have a lot of patience to get through these extremely boring book-length documents to find it. And that's by design. And that's the end of his email, and that's pretty interesting. I mean, he had encounters with Bigfoot when he was young, only to get out of the military after telling people about his experiences, and they moved him into a government agency that studies these things. But I find it odd that if he's in the group that studies these things, I wonder why he never saw a body or even more evidence. Apparently he was on the peripheral or maybe in some clerical position with one of these agencies. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But from these people's letters, you have to guess at these things if they're not very specific. So that's my guess. What's your guess? I don't know. I've heard of these government agencies knowing about these things. Will Jevning even hints at that in some of his podcasts. And so does Mark Newble and Larry Porch and Shelley Reed and their podcasts. And I'm going to put a little ad at the end of this video for their podcast. You guys need to go check out the Sawdust Beast channel. I'll put a link in the description. If you're into this Bigfoot thing, you will love these guys. They're happy, super nice guys. They're just, I've hung around them some and gone on trips with them. And I love being around Mark Newble, Larry Porch, and their crew. They're just good people. And they have a great podcast, and you just love their personalities. So you'll see that ad at the end of the video. Heck, let's just put it in there now. I'll put it in right after this story. All right, let's do that little ad, and then we'll go to the last story.
What was that?
Bigfoot, Sasquatch, boogers, real encounters, real evidence, real investigators, where old wisdom and valued truth seekers are sought. So pull up a chair and sit by the fire, if you dare. Going live on Beast of the Woods Monday nights, and Beast TV on Sawdust Beast Thursday nights at 8 p.m. on YouTube.
All right, this last story is really good. The man doesn't say whether to use his name or not, so I'm not going to. It's kind of my policy. I don't think the names are a big deal either way, but I like telling you that. I don't know why I like telling you that. There's a lot of things I say in this podcast. I have no idea why I say them, but I'm from the South, and we fill in gaps with discussion. It's just a weird, insecure tick that we have, some of us have down here. And I'd rather not have that, but I do. And so I just roll with it. But here's what this guy writes. Growing up, I lived in the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee. In the center of our neighborhood was a large outcropping of woods, which was about 350 acres total. On one side of the woods was a small bit of farmland. Bordering on the other sides were neighborhoods and the highways. The woods were made up of two large hills with a stream intersecting them. At the peaks of both hills were two houses and a long strip of driveway joining the houses and providing a route out of the woods. All in all, it was a decent-sized portion of wilderness with various connecting sections that eventually led to the Cumberland Plateau. It's not the typical place you'd imagine having Bigfoot experience, given that it isn't rural and there are so many houses, but that's what I believe happened. I can't say with absolute certainty, but these combined experiences were definitely out of the ordinary. They turned me from someone who did not care about or believe in Bigfoot into someone who is utterly fascinated by the subject. My first experience was on a chilly, overcast fall day when I was 10 years old. My dad and I were having a lazy Sunday watching football when we got a little bit bored and decided to take a hike in the woods. We made our way through the forest, taking time to appreciate this small patch of isolation in an otherwise urban area. The woods were quiet and eerily absent of wildlife everywhere. Other than an isolated chirp from a bird or limbs breaking below our feet, there was silence all around us. As we traversed deeper, we started to lose our bearings until we ultimately came upon the aforementioned stream. We decided to follow it. As we crested the land where it divided, we encountered that section of driveway that I mentioned earlier. We then decided we would simply follow the driveway down to whichever street it led to. We didn't want to trespass on someone else's land. We continued our hike down the hill, taking no notice of our surroundings, talking and simply trying to make our way back. Suddenly, however, from the corner of my right eye, I saw something that looked out of place. From far away, it looked like debris, but being the curious kid I was, I edged closer for a better look. When I arrived within about 10 feet or so of this mystery item, I realized what it was. It was a dead deer. This isn't something out of the ordinary in the woods, far from it. But what was strange was the manner in which the body was left. All the legs had been pulled off, yet its head was intact. Additionally, it was a fresh kill, and all of its ribs appeared to have been pulled back, exposing an empty abdomen. I thought nothing of it other than, oh, that's kind of weird. But before I could truly process everything, my dad, who was a short way behind me, firmly told me to turn back and that we were leaving. Well, I went along my merry way and did as he said, not giving it another thought. I don't recall having any sort of fear or sense that something was out of the norm, but as my dad would later tell me, he actually felt that we were in danger. We made our way down the hill and back to a road which took us home. We didn't speak of the incident further. For whatever reason, it wasn't until years later that my dad told me the hairs on the back of his neck stood up and something within him simply told him the situation was not right that day. While we have no proof this was done by Bigfoot, the strange way in which the deer was left and the feeling my dad had of being watched gave me the impression that something strange had occurred. 6 years later, my dad and I were taking a walk around the block on a frigid February night. As I mentioned earlier, the woods are in the center of our neighborhood and in close enough proximity that whatever is occurring can normally be heard if you are outside. It's common to hear coyotes and birds and the typical noises that occur in nature, yet on this night what we heard was very, very strange. As he and I rounded the corner of one of the roads in our neighborhood, we heard a loud howl which seemed to reverberate throughout the night for an unnaturally long period of time. It began loudly and increased in pitch before finally fading away after 8 or so seconds. It left both of us utterly dumbfounded and amazed. My dad, being a believer in Bigfoot, looked at me with surprised, wide eyes, and I was equally caught off guard and asked him what we had just heard. He told me he didn't know, but I'm quite sure he and I both knew what it was. With all that said, we are not avid outdoorsmen or hunters, and it's possible all this can be chalked up to misidentification. Yet with the limited amount of known fauna in the middle of Tennessee, it's hard for me to imagine we were simply misidentifying the sound. It was extremely human-like, yet it was also a sound outside of what is possible for a human. As contradictory as this may sound, that's the best way I can describe it. It was an animalistic, powerful, semi-human sound. It sounded very similar to the audio from the Ohio Howls video on YouTube, which is a long, almost siren-like wail that sounds like it's coming from a large, powerful animal. Whatever the noise was, it stunned us. We stood there dumbfounded, trying to comprehend what we'd just heard. We continued to stand there, frozen in our tracks and waiting to hear the noise again. If for no other reason than the hope that we weren't imagining it the first time and we were not crazy. But we didn't hear it again. We just heard the quiet of the night, and despite how amazed we both were, it also began to sink in that this experience would be shared by us alone. No one else would believe what happened, no matter how certain we both were, and to be honest, I don't blame them. If Bigfoot even exists, why would there be one in a residential area in the outskirts of a large city? It's a valid question, but my dad and I both know what we heard and saw. And these combined experiences have forever made me someone who questions the natural world and wonders what all is truly out there. And that's the end. And his last paragraph, these stories make me question what are the wonders that are truly out there. You guys are so nice to send these to me, and I don't just look at them as material to read on a YouTube channel. These stories fascinate me. In this culture, people don't write. People just don't write. I mean, they'll write emails and they'll write text. They're actually writing all the time. But to sit down and actually put together a cogent, organized recurrence or account or a remembrance of an event is really uncanny. And I've thought about this for the 3 years I've been doing this channel. I just don't think people just do that just for kicks. Maybe some do. And I've said before, I have a feeling I get trolled on this with fake stories sometimes. But there's no way for me to know. I don't put them to any test, and I don't Now all the crazy Bigfoot people will come in and go, well, it's all fiction, blah, blah, blah. Give me a story. Find me one story that you can verify. You can verify without any question, and I'll believe you. The only Bigfoot story that I know that we can verify without question is the Patterson Gimlin story. Bob Gimlin's story, I've heard it several times. What a great guy Bob Gimlin is. And I'm talking about the Bob Gimlin who was with Roger Patterson when they filmed Patty. Not only is he just a nice guy, but he was a rawhide dude when he was younger. And those guys weren't scared of anything. But to me, that's the only verifiable story that I have ever seen without question. I believe the Patterson Gimlin story. I absolutely believe it. All these other stories that people send me and that other people have put out, to the masses, there probably are some that can be verified, but I can't find them. You have to be able to back them up. But back to my point, these stories, whether true or not, they're fascinating. I mean, they're just unbelievable. So you guys asked me to keep commenting after these stories, and I never planned not to do that. I just was y'all got to give me some room to kind of poke at these people that jab at me. I don't ever pick a fight. I never pick a fight with anybody. I don't argue with people about religion or politics or wearing a mask or not wearing a mask or getting vaccinated or not. I don't need to impose my beliefs on you in a way that is going to make you feel uncomfortable, mainly because there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to change your mind. It's just like this. These people who are freaks on Bigfoot, they comment on this channel, all that story's BS. Well, how do you know what stories are BS? Really, you know this guy? Or you know the writer? You know the person who wrote this? How do you know? But they just have to say something. They're the kind of people who have to just force their beliefs and their opinions on you. And they feel like if they don't, I don't know what it is. They feel like something's missing in their life or something. You guys asked me to comment on these stories, so there you go. But let me every once in a while pick at these jerks who comment on this channel. Let me have a little fun with them. And that's all I want to do. That's all that is. And I had never planned on not commenting on this. So, all right. Hey, if you guys will hang on for a minute, I want to tell you about a couple of other things going on if you're interested. This is the end of the Bigfoot stories. I'm going to do about 5 or 10 minutes of something else here. So stand by. All right. What I wanted to tell y'all was back through the last 6 months, I've been real busy with my job. I'm not right now, so obviously I'm putting out more podcasts. But while I was doing that big job, I would have a couple hours, maybe once a week in the evenings. And I love doing this so much. I love these audio projects that I started recording some different things, and I have posted those things on my personal channel. The only thing I have up right now is the Gospel of John. Somebody several months ago commented, they said, I'd love to hear you read the Bible. And I thought, well, I can do that. The Bible's pretty easy to read. At least the New Testament is. So I picked out my favorite book and I just narrated the whole book and I put it on there. It's 1800 or 1900 years old, at least the New Testament is. And so it is public domain and there shouldn't be any copyright infringements on that. But there's no commentary on that at all. There's not any of my beliefs. There's not any of my theology or the things that I believe. It's just the Gospel of John without anything. And so we tend to not listen or not read the Bible. Most people, 90% of Christians don't even read the Bible. I don't read it enough myself. And I thought, well, if you just listen to it as a story, you might, for a minute, forget everything that your pastor has said, forget what your Sunday school teachers have said and your neighbors and all the loudmouths on the internet like me have said, and just listen to the story, listen to it like a story. Even people who don't believe, nobody's making a ploy to try to convert you or anything, but you would be smart to read the things that you don't agree with so that you understand the people who do believe and why they believe, or at least get some understanding of why they treasure the words in the New Testament and the Old Testament. So that's why I did it. If you guys want to go hear it, it's over there. I'll put a link in the description. I don't know, maybe I'll put part 1 on the end screen. That's what I'll do. I'll put part 1 on the end screen and you can go right to it. The channel's not monetized. I said in a community post that there would be no ads on it. However, I didn't know this, but even if a channel is not monetized, YouTube reserves the right to run ads. So you may run into ads. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way to put it on my website so you can just download it to your phone or computer. Another thing I'm going to do on that channel is just different projects, like abridged versions of classics that I've loved through the years, like, you know, some of Jack London's writings and Mark Twain and Joseph Conrad, some of the real classic authors. I'd love to do Moby Dick, but it is so damn long. Good grief, it's long. If I can find abridged versions that are maybe even written for young adults, I'll do those. Just something short, something fun to do. So that's what I'm going to use that channel for. It's not just going to be for the Bible. That was just the first project I did. There's nothing in it for me. I just did it because I love doing this. I love these audio projects, and they're just so much fun to me. And it's something different than Bigfoot. It's something actually way more important than Bigfoot. So I did it. It'll pop up in an end screen. Thanks for listening to me yak. I really appreciate you. Hope y'all have a good weekend. We're going to a blues festival here in about 4 or 5 hours. Gonna set out some lawn chairs, drink some beers, have a good time. The weather looks pretty good. I think this blues festival in my town goes from like 2 until midnight. So we've got all day to get over and listen to some good music. Again, let me know what you're doing this weekend in the comments. I'd love to know. And I'll see y'all probably early next week. Have a good weekend. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks.